What made you yourself successful?
It's funny because the question is interesting in itself because how do you define success is the first part of that. But I do feel that I am successful because I am really, I think, well balanced. I love that sort of I have fulfillment in every area right now. I eat healthy, I run, I do half marathons and marathons. I have a beautiful family that I couldn't be luckier about. I live in Park Slope, Brooklyn, which is my dream place to live, where I grew up. And I have a great company that sort of the dream company that I've wanted to build that has its challenges, and every company does, as you know, but it's exactly sort of what I envisioned, and that gives me that free spirit that I wanted. But if you notice, I said the company last, not first. You know, I read a lot of books. You know, we both read a lot of books, and I listen to a lot of books, and there's a lot of cliches that you're going to hear in these interviews. I'm sure you heard them before, and I've done a lot of interviews. What you realize is they're cliches because they're true. The biggest thing that I've realized that's helped me be successful, especially over the past couple of years, is realizing that when you're not going to make all the right decisions. And too often in the beginning you try to make all the right decisions so you don't make any, or you make less. And realizing that when you make a wrong decision, that's part of the process. So the biggest thing that's helped me, especially the past couple of years as we've been trying to grow and we make mistakes, is actually being able to handle the stress, the downsides, and understand how to look at it optimistically. If you can get that part down, because when things are going good, it's easy, right? Mm-hmm. So how you handle that and knowing things come in waves, because if everything was up, there'd be no contrast to, it wouldn't be great because that would be normal. So I think that's what I've really worked on. In terms of being really successful in business, I think I've done well. I think I get where I need to go, and I know I will be successful. But I really, the big game or the challenge is to be really successful in growing a big business, successful financially, because that's part of the process, and that's where I still am in my journey.
How do you define success?
Being well-rounded and also being even-keeled. Not too high, not too low. So if you're well-rounded and you're even-keeled, you can be living in a fishing village in the smallest area and be very happy and successful. So it's not about achieving a lot. So for me, I like to be very spiritual in that regard, like who are we and why do we exist? What are we all doing here? So as long as I don't forget the big picture, I feel like there's a success there. Last thing is crossing things off a list. You know, I feel if I don't actually able to cross things off a list or set goals and hit them, I start getting antsy. And if I actually haven't wrote the goals, which we all get through that stage where we go through times, then I get even antsier because you wake up and you're not sure what direction you're going. So success is also having that direction.
Do you have mentor or mentors? And can you share with us how your mentors helped you shape your life?
It's funny, I didn't realize it until a couple of years ago, but you know where I'm going with this, but my whole life, really my mentor has been my dad. But I didn't recognize that, and I didn't accept that. He's been my mentor. He's been a mentor in the fact that the way he lived his life, he was always successful. He had his own business, but he came home from work, and he was a personal injury attorney. And when he would come home from work, and most attorneys, I'm sure as you know, are not happy. He wouldn't complain, he wouldn't do anything. What he would say is he's changing people's lives. He's giving money to somebody who has nothing, a lot of money, and he would focus on that. And I think what I got out of seeing my dad growing up is he had the freedom to sort of create his own world, and he was happy in what he did. And so I always instilled in myself, I knew I was going to be successful, and I wanted that type of environment. As business has grown, and over the past couple of years as we've tried to make some moves, and he's retired from his being a personal injury attorney, he's had a lot more time. And his optimistic values, and you should watch his interview if you haven't yet, it's on here as well. All the things that he says that sound potentially corny, that I know pretty well, he's not making them up, that's how he lives. And the things that he's been able to achieve on a real estate standpoint and a business standpoint that would stress me out, the fact that he's able to do that, and what he's done is we sit down and we walk through things together. I'm on Entrepreneurs Organization. I'm on the board, I'm the mentors chair. So it's been really empowering for me. The businesses in EO are generally 1 million to 10 million. There's exceptions all around, but at least a minimum of 1 million. So what I've been doing is I've been matching up mentors, generally people who've grown a 25 million plus business, who are mentoring people who are in the couple $1 million range. And I've seen such connections where it's actually changed their business because they've gone through the things before. What my dad always used to say to me is, I have 37 years experience, more than you or whatever. And I'm like, okay, great, you're always gonna have that more than me. How can I defeat that? And as I have all these 22-year-olds in my company and they're growing as we do new things, and I've done so much more than them, I realize experience is real. Because things that I take for granted that they should get, they don't get because they haven't been through that before. So that would be the most closest area of mentorship. We're just getting started in that area.
Tell us a little bit about your company, Further Ed.
Yeah.
What is the mission, values, and purpose of the organization?
So Further Ed originally started as Lawline, or lawline.com. And lawline.com is the largest provider of online continuing legal education. So if you're an attorney, you need to keep your credits every year, you need to keep your license. That's the mandatory side. And then we've ventured into accounting, we've ventured into real estate, we've built a software platform. And as we started evolving about 1.5 years ago, the name Lawline we felt was limiting to sort of the overall mission, so where we're going. So we renamed it to Further Ed, Lawline still being the biggest brand, still existing. But the thing about Lawline in 2006, if I can show you the documents, so there are people there who can attest to it, and we still have it. If you looked at the course materials, we had a mission statement on each one and sort of what it was for. It was never about, we want to provide the best continuing legal education around. It was always about lifelong learning, fulfillment, and growth. And for me, it's always been this general thing that we want to inspire people to learn and grow. Because when you go through that process, that's where change happens. And I have this thought process: learning is easy, change is hard. Because many times people learn something, and we all are guilty of it. You learn something, it sounds great, you get energized. 2 weeks later, you moved on to the next thing, just because that's how life is. So, to me, the hope of our company is to not only have people inspired by the learning, but to provide the tools to allow them to change over time through the right type of content. So Further Ed is a platform that right now educates professionals in many different fields and provides a platform for them to, for law firms and to bar associations to host their own content. But the vision ultimately is to educate everybody. And the concept of mandatory education, while that is the premise, it is not the route that we're changing, the strategy or the content strategy. It's more about, you want to learn because you want to grow. Yes, you can get credits too, but those are the attorneys or the professionals that we want to attract and to work on. Because as you know, in a mandatory business, it becomes a commodity because people just want to get their credits done. And that's not inspiring. You don't get up in the morning, okay, let me give somebody mandatory education. No, let me educate somebody. Let me share legal intelligence that can help them in their practice.
Why do you think your company became successful? If you had to put together, here's the top 3 or top 5 reasons your company became successful, so that our audience can apply those principles within their own organization.
So I used to do interviews like this a lot. And the first thing I realized, there's no magic answer. I was looking for in every conversation, what made you successful? And I was like, just tell it to me. And then I got themes of things that made people successful, that made their company successful. But if I look to our company, we started as an education company, but really what we were in the beginning was a marketing company that happened to have education products. I knew that it was a competitive space, that if we did not get our brand out there and market and do direct mail and do online marketing and do email marketing and do all the things early on, it didn't matter how good our product was or how nice the site looked. So that's what made us successful in the early years. In the later years, because we were really successful in that, we were able to attract a lot of great faculty and partners. So we went from having literally 12 courses when I started to today, right now we have over 1,500 hours of courses in every state. And we have a new studio that we built, or they do it from a remote webcast, and having really interesting, timely content. Yesterday, we did a course on the Bitcoin. It's in the news today. What is the Bitcoin and what's going on with it? We had a couple hundred people actively watching it on a webcast. more questions than you ever seen in a webcast before. Lots of activity because people are trying to understand what's going on. So if we can provide tools like that, it's going to keep bringing us successful. Third, when we hit a certain level, was instilling some of the core values and culture to get things to stick. And it wasn't really instilling them because you can't force that on a company. It was more seeing who was here and what core values we had. There was two things that really changed sort of my way of thinking. One was an article I read from Jim Collins. He wrote the Get to Great. It was in Harvard Business Review. It's about core values and purpose. Really great article. I highly recommend it. You can get it for like $2 online. And so it's a great article, and it talked about the main thing is it doesn't matter what your core purpose is, as long as you shout it to the rooftops. But it talked about one thing called the Mars Group. Mm-hmm. If you were to take your company and start it on Mars, who would be the 3 or 4 or 5 people who you'd bring to Mars with you that would instill the values of your company? So it lets you think in that way. So from that, and then I also read Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh. Great book. I highly recommend that as well. If anybody knows Zappos, they know the culture is unique and different.
What are the challenges that you're facing within your organization and how you're dealing with those challenges?
So we're coming into our 7th year right now. So what I and you probably can speak to this more, is especially being an EO, what I find, the first years we had tremendous growth, obviously, and we've always had that. But what I find is when you hit 7 years, the real plans for because we have big expectations of what we want the company to grow into, as a lot of people do. But a lot of people say that, but they don't really mean it. They say, "Oh, we want to be a $25 million company, $50 million." But they don't, not a $50 million company, but none of their actions on a daily basis actually lead to that. So it's just that's what they say to themselves. We do have big expectations. So one of the things that I realize is when you get to our stage, you do one of two things. You either become a lifestyle business. Your growth slows down, and then you just want to protect what you have. And you might actually lose revenue to some sort of level because you slow down, and that's where it ends up, and that's probably where 99% of businesses end up, or they go out of business or whatever it is, or you want to become an enterprise, and when you do that, to become an enterprise. Generally, you have to innovate, you have to find different ways to grow, unless even in your own area. And there's an analogy, sort of like you're on a cliff, and you want to you have to take risks to innovate. So there's a fine line between jumping too fast and falling and crashing to sort of getting it nice so you can rise. And that's a big challenge that we have right now. In the 5 years ahead, how do we get that really big growth that I want? And the question is, why do I want growth? And that is a good question, because you can have a good living, you can do well at the size that we're at. If you have more revenue, generally you're having a bigger impact, and you're able to do more and have more power. And I believe if we can't grow to the size that we want to grow in the next few years, our core mission of educating everyone is going to be in jeopardy. The big things that we're working on, and so there's the process stuff internally. I find that every few years we have to start all over with our process, just because changing people leaving or things that worked when we were smaller didn't work. And just everything you got to prevent things from being stale. Look at Amazon, look at Google, look at Apple, how they are able to, every new product. I mean, I just finished reading The Everything Store, which is a book on Amazon, and it's really interesting, but it talks about how they innovated throughout their life.
What makes a great entrepreneur?
Because obviously there's no magic answer to any of this. First thing is that you have to be a doer. You just have to do. And most often people are trying to get things done. They want to prepare, they want to write plans, they want to talk about it. You just got to start before it's ready, before it's clean. It's going to be messy, and you have to understand that. Number 2, you can't listen to the naysayers. There's going to be, every entrepreneur goes through that, and that's the rite of passage. You can't listen to the negative naysayers. When you hear a naysayer, you go, great, let me hear that. And of course, you have to think of who that naysayer is. And what their experience is. If they've done what you're trying to do, then maybe you listen to them. If you're your husband or wife or someone in your family who's just nervous and doesn't want to see you fail. 3, you have to give others without wanting anything in return. I love that, doing that, like where you connect people, where you help, and really not want anything in return. And I've learned a lot over the years in terms of being a good leader and working with others. And in life, you can't control the weather, you can't control the stock market, you can't control the politicians, you can't control your wife, your spouse, your boss, your employees. The only two things you can control is how you think and how you feel. Again, the only two things you can control is how you think and how you feel. And it's very empowering when you realize that, because too often we think the challenges are in the outside world. But really, it's all in our head all the time. It's the self-defeating thoughts. And what's important about that, the second part of that is, in terms of motivating people who work for you, I learned really from that experience, you can't control people who work for you. And too often I would like have a conversation with someone and say, here, do this, do that, and here's how you can do it. And a week or two will go by and nothing will be done. And I say, you know what, maybe I said it wrong. Let me say it like this. Do it like this, do it great. I would talk like my dad, I would get all energetic. You have to, I can, I will, I must. And nothing would happen. Then somebody else would come to the company and I'd say, can you do this for me just the same way? Within a half hour or 2 hours, it would be done. And I said to myself, I didn't say anything different between the A and B, and that's when I realized that it had nothing to do with me, it had to do with their internal motivation to get it done. And that was a very empowering thing, because once you realize that you're not motivating employees, they're motivating themselves, you're just setting up the parameters for their success. If you can keep that in mind on a regular basis, which is challenging, it really helps create the right environment. One of the things that's really helped me grow, and I impart that to my employees, is either one, working with a coach in one form or another, because like I said, too often you read a book, but once the book's over, you really can't let that, generally after a few weeks it's gone and you move on. So you really need to be working with somebody on a regular basis. But the most important thing you can be doing, and everyone should be doing, is journaling on a daily basis. I recommend Penzu. Mm-hmm. It's a free software for online journaling. Also, Frame of Mind Coaching. That was one of my coaches that I worked with. She has her own online journaling software, which I recommend either or. It has been a game changer for me, because too often you have so many thoughts in your head. If you don't put it on writing, it's gone. And I have this saying, or I was thinking of sort of bringing it up to our employees. If you don't bring it in writing, we're fighting. Because too often people, they say, oh, here's my plan, here's what I want to do. But there's nothing written down. Within a week, it's not going to happen because there's no structure behind it. And once you start writing, and the way I do it, because too often it's like, well, what do you journal about? The first thing I do is I just journal about what I did the day before. And as you're doing that, I'll be talking about how to great interview with Russell, we talked about this, this, and this, and all of a sudden like 4 ideas pop in my head, or 4 issues, and then I can kind of go on those tangents. And in a couple of years, which I have 2.5 years of journaling, I have 400 pages that I printed out and I'm reading. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but you see a lot of the same things that you're feeling today, 2 years ago, and you realize, while you've come far in some areas, you're the same stressed out person you were 2 years ago, and you forget that. And that's important because it gives that perspective.
When I read a book, I interpret the ideas in the book in one way. Once I listen from the author, I see the things differently. I pick up on the things I didn't pick up when I was reading. And when I was reading, I have a lot more imagination going on. Yeah. And I'm a big believer of also listening to self-help books.
Especially listening, it's like getting a private coach for $10.
Exactly.
There's a lot of books I'd recommend. One book I would recommend to people listening is The Morning Miracle. The reason I recommend it, it changed my mentality. There's a whole backstory to why he wrote the book. But generally, when most people wake up in the morning, I was this person, you hit snooze, 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 snooze. You don't want to wake up. You want to stay in bed and you're comfortable. And he changed the mentality about everything, so much more that you can get done before 8 a.m. And I wake up at 5 a.m. every morning now, and I spend an hour and a half to myself. And you feel like a little kid, like every day is Christmas, or every day is something that you're looking forward to. And especially when you're busy and you have family and you have kids, you have very little time to yourself. And it's become such a ritual for me. All of a sudden, I never thought I was a morning person. Now I am a morning person, and I run in the morning. And what I like about the book so much is whenever I recommend it to somebody, everyone goes through the same, 99%, some people are like, whatever. They go through that same transformation where they weren't morning people, now they are. And why I recommend it is most books you read, you don't really know what to do with. You feel good about it. Here, there's clear steps that you can do that will change the way you are. and it was written by somebody who sort of went through his own tragedy. So definitely, definitely a book that I would recommend, and it will literally change your mindset.
What makes a good leader?
I'll start with talking about a couple books that I've read. I love reading autobiographies or biographies about businesses or business owners. So I've recently read Steve Jobs, which is by far the best business book I've ever read. I've actually read it and I've listened to it twice on double speed on Audible. I listened to PayPal Wars, how PayPal grew. I listened to Hatching Twitter, The Everything Store, which is the Amazon book, and Total Recall. I don't know if you know about Arnold Schwarzenegger's how he got started. Pure determination and optimism and growth to get from where he was to where he is today. Amazing book, really amazing. And so I sort of see what are qualities that they had. And obviously they're not perfect people, and Steve Jobs was sort of sociopath or whatever it was. So I always thought growing up, because based on what you see about leaders, in order to be a good leader, you had to be mean. And when I realized what that was, and I always thought my dad was sort of mean in a way as a leader or whatever. And they have this trait where I think hurts me in a way, but it also helps me, is some really good leaders aren't as empathetic as others. Because sometimes when you're too empathetic, you want to make others happy or you want people to like you. And a good leader, one of those qualities is they make decisions that they believe in themselves, knowing that not everyone's going to like it. And one of the challenges, if you're trying to empathize with everyone and have everyone all be okay with it, people actually don't want that. They want somebody who is telling them this is where to go and how to get there. And people really do want a leader. Because a lot of people don't have that confidence in something. They want somebody to say that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was not a wartime country and never had built an industry, we are going to get into this as a democracy and we're going to win. And they want to see somebody who does that. And I want that, even in my life. If we knew President Obama was going back home and say, oh my God, I don't know what about this, and he was really nervous, we'd lose faith right now. But we hope that regardless if we believe in it or not, he believes in his decisions strong-heartedly. That's why a flip-flopper makes people uncomfortable. Really amazing book, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, classic. I think there is a saying where it says, a good leader, they make decisions fast, but they stick to it. A bad leader takes a long time to make the decision, and they keep changing it. And I feel I've been guilty of that as well. And I think that's really one of the key, most important parts. The motivation and the other stuff, there's lots of different areas, but it's that ability to have that belief will rally people behind you. A lot of people didn't like Steve Jobs, but they rallied behind him because he was smart and he had a damn belief in what he was doing.
There's two types of thoughts out there. A group of people thinks that leaders are born. Another group says that leaders are made. Of course, there's also there's a middle ground. Some are saying that it's both. What are your thoughts? Leaders are made or born?
I think leaders are made. I think obviously people who have the qualities are luckier than others. That charismatic quality from the beginning, because it does start with influence. And in order to have influence, you have to be charismatic and you have to be confident. So some people have that automatically, but it's 100% in my mind, it can be made at any point in your life, because all you have to do is flip that mindset, that frame of mind, and have that belief in yourself. So what do I have as a leader? I have moments. Maybe moments last a week, maybe they last a year, maybe they last a day. But I have moments, and then I have moments of not. And maybe I want to be too perfect, because even the best leaders have that. Everyone has self-doubt. But certainly, I believe if I had a better frame of mind, I would be more successful. I think that the frame of mind has held me back to where I would want to achieve things. But ultimately, what it has to come from is self-motivation. I can't try to make you a leader if you don't want to be a leader. So where does that self-motivation come from? And that's where the nature versus nurture comes from. I still believe it's made. It can be made from the family environment. It can be made from genetics a little bit, but you have to believe it's made somewhat. However, my opposite to that is I have twins, boy-girl twins, who are completely opposite from the beginning. And they're boy-girl, so there's that too. But it's amazing to see completely different personalities from the beginning. They're in the same environment, they grew up together, and they're different people. So those qualities certainly help one edge over the other. but my son or daughter either could be that leader. I feel like I go through times where I'm a leader, but I'm also times where I'm introverted, where I don't want to talk, I don't want to network, I just want to sit and learn and research. And I struggle with that sometimes.
How do you define the right people? And is there a single definition of that, or is definition is going to change based on that job role and based on the company situation?
Sure. So the first thing about the right person is understanding what their skill set is and where they fit. And too often, I mean, some people just are not the right at many things, but I believe everybody has a skill set. They just, a lot of times they accept the first job that they get, or there's no other opportunities, or they're not even sure what their skill set is. For small businesses like we're in, generally the right people are self-starters. Because there's less direction. If you're a self-starter, the self-motivation, the question is, we've had self-starters at our organization that were there for some time, but then wanted to move doing their own thing because they're such a good self-starter. So, which is great. I would do that any day of the week. But that is what I learned early on. But unfortunately, self-starters are few and far in between to find, unless we don't have big recruiting efforts. We do the best. So the second level is the core values come into play, and people who really believe in what you're trying to do. They're good people who want to work hard and make things happen. If you want to work hard, and if you're given a job and you want to do it well, there's nothing that can go there. Of course, and the third thing is, which falls into play, especially in many roles, is raw intelligence. If you can tell pretty fast in a first conversation with somebody, you ask them some random questions to throw them off or whatever, how intelligent they are. And what is really intelligence, as you and I know, it's how much do you research on your own to understand what's going on in different topics. That's where intelligence comes from, generally, The other thing is, goes to self-starter, is that self-starter driven mentality. When we do interviews, if I interview you and if I ask you, tell me some things that you've done that show you're driven, if you can't give me at least a handful of examples without having to think about it, or even if you think about it, you can't really give me specific examples, you're not a driven person. But if you can, that means you've accomplished something, if we can get into that. And a lot of people, even at 18 or 21, they can give examples of when they were 11 and they did some sort of competition, they were whatever it is. And that's a good thing to have in mind as somebody interviewing or thinking about who you are as your own resume, is do you have that thought of yourself, just thinking about in drivenness, what are 10 things that I can know at the top of my head to show that I'm a driven person? And I don't even really have that. Like, I know I've done things, but that's something maybe I'll do, because it is important to realize all that you've accomplished, and that I can sort of share that, because people want to surround themselves with driven people, because we can't, if I had to come up with all the ideas in our organization to make everything happen, we wouldn't be where we are today. And if we want to grow, certainly, how could I be here interviewing with you if I need to be at the company helping drive it forward? So hopefully there's enough people, but we're always looking for that more.
Why there is a major skill gap problem in United States, and how can we solve that problem?
It seems like right now, especially in the development area, in the IT area, that obviously is shifting. In the next 10 years, it's going to completely change more. But even now, there's not too many. That is a real skilled job where you need to learn that can help. To me, developers are magicians. Most other, if you think about, there's things where really low-skilled jobs are all slowly disappearing, and there's books and examples on that all over the place. But then there's the entry-level worker who's gone to college, and they're ready to get started. The generation coming out right now, there's a drive that seems to be missing overall. And this is very general, and I can't speak to this myself, but what I see is, and I wasn't around when things were different, but I do notice that, so one of the things we look for is that belief in yourself and that drive. And so what I think one of the challenges is, and this is where I would love to get involved in over the next 5 to 10 years, and form a nonprofit, work with you and building a nonprofit, is, and I have kids in kindergarten now, and you have a 7-month-old, so we have a vested interest, is I don't believe people are taught to focus on themselves early on. So that they don't understand how to, that self-help stuff how to focus on what is their goals, what is their vision, where do they want to accomplish, who are they, and not just a quick talk, really a whole concept and course on that. So that should be throughout your entire life and childhood. You grow up not knowing who you want to be, where you want to go, and then you just get thrown into it. So that's one. Two is the way that the school systems is set up right now. That's going to break as well. I mean, to pay $90,000 for a 4-year college that you get no skills that can help you in this modern workforce, it's going way above inflation, and there's a whole second bubble there that's going to happen. And so that's a problem in itself. Of course, in law school, which is a lot of our, all of our customers really are some sort of secondary education, that's even more loans, and loans are not dischargeable. So that's two. And then I guess three in my mind is what are the jobs of the future? Are we planning for the jobs of the future, or are we planning for the jobs of yesterday? And we don't even know what the jobs of the future yet. So I think that's part of the challenge. You know, people, they are graduating school and say, oh, I'm going to be doing social marketing. And I'm like, well, what is that? I'm posting on Twitter, right? So it's understanding how to change that mindset. And I would say that is things that I think of when I think of education.
Why reading is fundamental to success? Why is reading important?
You're learning from others' experiences. So that's first and fundamental there, so you really can get it down. Two, as I said earlier on, when you read a book, generally more than a conversation, there's a lot of time and thought that's put into it. So you can, unfortunately most books are too long, but so you know you're getting something compact that makes sense. Three, it helps you visualize where you want to go. And what's good about reading versus talking or whatever, it's silent. And when you're silent, as you said, it just leads to, I really believe when you read books and then you start writing too, just like working out, there's electrons in your brain that's connecting. And when you do all that, you get a variety of experiences. And as you said, when you start reading 4 or 5 books that all say the same thing, whether you're right or wrong, they're right or wrong, is you sort of start, that becomes who you are, and you start telling people all that, and then they think that's from you, but it's really from the 5 books that you just read. And it only takes a certain amount of reading on a topic to become an expert. And I'll give you an example. After the 2008 bankruptcy, the bank crisis, I was just in shock. How could the government just put $700 billion, print it out of thin air and put it on there? And how does that happen? So I read about 4 or 5 books about the Federal Reserve. Shocking. Just shocking when you actually understand how the financial system was built and what it really means. I learned a lot about that, and I had a goal to become a real big expert in that whole financial policy, because unfortunately the policies that we've done over the past 4 or 5 years, we just printed more money. That's all we did. We lowered interest rates, which essentially also prints more money, and it can't go on forever, so there is going to be more coming up in the future. So I said, well, what can I know that can help me prepare for it or actually do well by it? Of course, that takes a faith to know what you're doing. But so I find it's interesting to learn about that.
What's your assessment about the education industry right now? And do you see any trend in the industry that you want to share with our audience?
Well, next week I'm going to South by Southwest EDU, and then the month after I'm going to Innovation Education Summit in Arizona. And I went there last year, and the theme last year was that we were in the top or the bottom of the first inning of where we're going in education. But the other theme was that there was no, especially in the public education system, there was no framework. For example, there's a lot of apps, there's a lot of programs that are being developed for students that all look really great, but there's no real framework for students for public school systems all across the country to interact with that in their database. And without that framework, it can't really expand, and there's no pipes. And so that's sort of what this stage is now, figuring out who's going to be the owner of the pipes. So if you have built an app, you can just go right into the system, and schools can use it all across the country. And unfortunately, now it's students and teachers doing it on their own. And the other thing that I'm sure you've heard of is the term MOOC, and EDX or Coursera. And so that's, everyone's just, they're just trying to figure that out too. And so they said, okay, well, let's just take all these videos and put them online for free and put questions on there so other people, anyone in the world can learn. And now they're trying to figure out how to turn that into some sort of assessment where you can get a certification and pay for that. But what's really interesting when I was at these conferences, because when you're out of the loop, here's the other thing that's interesting about business. You just assume when you see a business doing something, they know what they're doing. You just assume that, like, they know what they're doing. They must know something I don't know. And what I realize is they both have really no clue what they're doing. So they're all trying to figure it out right now. So we'll see what happens with that. But the biggest challenge is, as we both have discussed in the past, is how do you create an innovative learning-based program that sort of tailors to your needs and actually keeps you involved, and it's not just someone talking and you're listening. And there's a lot of different programs that do that now, but I believe we can't even imagine how, when it happens, we're gonna be like, oh my God, it's so obvious, why were we not doing that for learning always? But same thing with the iPhone. Of course there's an iPhone. So that's the cool part about it. And of course it's gonna be much less expensive. It just has to be. At least I'm counting on that with my 3 kids. But it has to be much less expensive. And I believe me and you will be a big part of it.
Why did you go to law school, and how did you end up becoming a CEO of a company?
I graduated college in 1999. My first few years was working in the internet space, or 5 years. And my first job was at 24/7 Media during the dot-com bubble. Parties, it was amazing. And then of course the bubble burst, and then the stock went down and things changed pretty fast. So I went, and I was in sales. So I went from 3 sales jobs in my first couple of years, and then I was a real estate broker. When I became a real estate broker, I actually really enjoyed the process of learning how to take that exam and actually taking the exam. And that was the first time, and by the way, all my dad ever wanted me to do was become a lawyer. So of course it was the last thing I wanted to do, plus I had no interest in personal injury law. But when I took that test, like 4 years after school, I said, I sort of enjoy this. Maybe there is something there. So that was one, but 2, what I found was I was just a salesperson, and I knew I was smart, but I knew I didn't really have a skill. Like, I'm a sales guy, and I just was trying to look to my future, and I didn't want to be in sales for the next 20 years, going from job to job every 2 to 3 years, growing salary. I wanted to be a professional. I wanted to have a career, and that's where probably the unknown mentorship from my dad came in, where I just wanted to have a career. So then I got into law school, and then what happened in law school was, I always read entrepreneur books. Never really started anything, but I always had that book by my side. And my dad had the TV show Law Line, so I wasn't intimidated by that. And I tried to do these networking groups in school, and I was rejected. So I said, why am I going to do a moot court, which is one of the things, when I'll start my own thing. And I think it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad was where I drew the line. I loved the book, really inspired me. The only thing about it is it didn't tell me how to start a business. He never really talked about how he started his wallet business or whatever. He just talked about the quadrants. And so I felt empty afterwards. I'm like, well, I don't know what to do with any of this. So I said, why don't I learn from entrepreneurs on the front line? I started interviewing entrepreneurs. I started a public access TV show called True NYC, and I put them all online. I was one of the first online websites that interviewed entrepreneurs. And so long story short, I ended up getting in touch with a web development company. My dad already had a site that they'd built, but they pretty much closed the company down. I decided my second year of law school, I knew there was an opportunity. There's 1 million lawyers in the country. The site had 15 courses on it. It was making a couple $1,000s a month. Nothing really, but nobody was touching it. I'm like, a site that makes money without anyone touching it, could you imagine if someone put all their energies into it? And I started to just restart the company, or start a new company and build that brand. And I remember my dad sitting down with my dad, and he's like, well, how are you going to support yourself? And thinking I was crazy. He's making very clear, you just went through law school, you got to support yourself. So I gave it a shot, and it worked out really well. And I guess what I realized, I didn't want to be a lawyer. I interned at different experiences, different jobs. One of them I didn't like, and I told him I wasn't going to be continuing through the school year. And he berated me so much in his office and tore me apart. When I left, I was actually crying. And I realized, I said, being a lawyer is just like any other job, except you're a lawyer, but you still have to work yourself up. And I'm like, I don't want to have to start from the bottom, and build myself up and deal with people like that ever again. And that's where I just sort of closed that chapter and moved on and put all my eggs in the law line basket.